how to cope with an election loss. Oh my God. If you guys want to talk about politics, I will make an exception like once. So we don't talk about politics, and at the same time, I'm really struggling to cope with the results. I'm absolutely terrified. Use the word, we could use words of reassurance. If you all want to talk politics, we can talk politics. So a couple of disclaimers that I'm going to toss out. The first is that why am I willing to talk about politics? So I think that we're a mental health channel. And so why would we talk about politics? Well, people in chat are saying, I'm absolutely terrified. I'm scared of the future. I'm scared for people that I love. So like this becomes mental health today, right? So we're not even necessarily talking about politics. We're talking about mental health. So we're all for talking about mental health. And today of many days throughout the year, I think there's a very tight tie between these two things. Second thing that I want to say is I'm not going to share what my political beliefs are. I'm not going to share who I voted for. I don't think it's relevant to the discussion. And the reason for that is that it's not our job to take political sides, or at least not yet. Maybe that'll change one day. But I also want y'all to think about, as I'm going to say things, there's a decent chance that I'll trigger people on both sides. Chance, I don't know. Right? I think part of the problem that we see is that if I say I am pro this person, or if I say that I am anti this person, then what that does is changes the way that you receive what I say. This is half the problem with politics right now to begin with. Because if someone identifies as a particular political belief, then we automatically judge them, right? Like it changes everything that comes in. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we've seen and why we see so much political divisiveness is because we have such a preconceived set of some scars that just activate when someone says I'm conservative or I'm liberal. Now, as to what happened, as I'm sure you all know, Donald Trump won the election and he won the popular vote as a Republican for the first time since 2004. I think the last time the Republicans won the popular vote was, I think in 2004. So I think it was Bush. So here's what I think is going on. And I think like this needs to be like taken pretty seriously. So the first problem in the world today is that we don't actually care about what people who disagree with us believe. So if you look at like both sides, I have members in my family who are die hard for Kamala Harris and for Donald Trump. We're talking about like in the same household at dinner time, there is so much separate. Like I have people in my family who are like die hard for either side. So here's what I have observed. The problem with politics right now is no one cares to understand why someone believes something that you don't believe. The most common thing that I hear is, how can people be so stupid? It's so simple. It's such, literally, I had a conversation yesterday with a family member of mine who was like, it's common sense. It's common sense, common sense, common sense. Everyone thinks that everyone else or the opposite side is an idiot. No one is striving to understand. And I say this as someone who's like not a great couples therapist, but like I've done couples therapy for people, for marriages that fall apart and for marriages that succeed. The most important thing is understanding the other person's perspective. If you want to make something work, you have to understand the other person's perspective. Now, here's what's going to happen when I say that. Right? So what I want y'all to do more than anything else, forget about what I'm saying. Don't forget about what I'm saying, but pay attention to your reaction to what I say. So I would bet money that there's a good chunk of y'all out there that say, okay, the most important thing is to understand the other person's perspective. There's a good chunk of y'all out there that will mentally think, I'm fine understanding their perspective. They're the ones who don't want to understand ours. They're the ones that are closed-minded. They're the ones that don't care about immigrants or are worried about the woke mind virus or don't care about traditional values, or they're the ones that are ruining Dragon Age, Veilguard, by adding random crap into it, right? So there's like, I'm okay. I'm open-minded. They're the ones that are not open-minded. Which, by the way, is exactly what you see in couples therapy. This person is not willing to, this person is not listening to me. They're not willing to understand my perspective. They're always thinking about their own thoughts. So I think that there's a couple of like really serious, like interesting things. So I say this scientifically, okay? I'm not saying that this is right or wrong. I'm not trying to criticize, but I think Democrats, there's one really interesting thing that happened with the Republicans and Trump and did not happen with the Democrats. And that was a really open primary process. So I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just pointing this out, right? So like if you look at what happened in the primaries, there were many allegations in 2016 that the Democratic Party basically had decided on Hillary Clinton. And then there was a lot of like, there were some allegations that things weren't like fair in the primaries in terms of the DNC supporting Clinton over people like Bernie Sanders. And what happened in the Republican primaries? Trump showed up, was at like polling at 4%, and then went through the gauntlet of primary process and rose to the top. He knocked out everybody else. And this time there was a primary process. He was just so dominant. So the first thing that I think, and this is like, I'm not trying to say that this is good or bad or blaming the Democrats or whatever. I'm just saying if we look at it scientifically, one group had a pretty robust primary process and the other group did not. And so what does that do, right? What do you think a primary process does? A primary process is a testing ground for the opinions of the people. That's what it is. It's like a trial run for an election. So I think this was pretty significant. So it's also shocking that 15 million fewer Democratic votes in 2024 election versus 2020 election. 15 million fewer Democrats stayed home. So we're not talking about voter turnout being higher. We're talking about voter turnout being substantially lower, right? So it's like, that's really interesting. So this is just one data point. I'm not a political theorist. I'm not a political scientist. I don't understand government. I don't understand this stuff. But just as a simple looking at the data, I see two very different things in terms of how the candidate was selected. And I wonder if that has an impact, right? That's for y'all to decide and people who are more knowledgeable than me to decide. It is a data point that I think is interesting. It is a data point that I believe is significant, but as a scientist, we don't draw a conclusion, right? We just say, this is an observation. Now this observation needs to be turned into a hypothesis, tested, understood, analyzed, etc. So please do not take this as, oh, the reason that Trump won is because Harris didn't go through a primary. What I'm observing is that if you had a primary process, does a primary process select for the strongest candidate to win a national election? That is the question. Now, the assumption is yes, but we don't know that, right? We don't know that. I haven't looked at 40 years of primaries and analyzed them and determined that, oh, okay, it actually doesn't. The two may not be correlated because the process of winning a primary may involve selecting across certain criteria that don't translate over to the general election. Very possible. That's the first thing. Second thing that I think, I'm going to show you all a couple of clips and I'm going to invoke a couple of really, really terrible things that are going to trigger people, but let's go. So this is one of the, I commented about this earlier. So a couple of years ago, I was listening to this interview, okay? And this is an interview with Bill Maher and Jordan Peterson, okay? So like, please don't, I'm like going to show Jordan Peterson on our stream. I think the dude is actually like a really good psychologist. So like, I learned a lot from his course on personality, I think is excellent. So I'm not espousing or saying that his political beliefs are correct or whatever, but I think there are some things that he's like really good at. And I think this is one of those observations.
Can I ask
Trump is like, why can't I get
question
this?
about this?
Yes,
I mean,
please.
I've been listening to all of this about Trump and watching how this conversation
is
go in the U.S.
2018,
I have one question about it. I mean, there's all these people in the U.S. who are on the conservative side who are aligned with Trump for all sorts of reasons. And there's all this tension around his presidency and attempts to pull him out of his office for various reasons. And like, what do you think will happen if that comes to pass? What do you think will happen to these people that have identified with Trump? And like, how is it that Democratic types, for example, are holding out their hand to say to these conservative types, sort of like, welcome back into the fold? Because it looks to me, from an outsider's perspective, that your country is polarizing in a way that's not good, and that, you know, people are going after Trump. And I understand that. It's not like I don't understand that. But there's all these people that elected him and that are identified with him, and they're not taking this well, you know. And so, well, they're not. They're not. It's not. And you know, you might not think they're very bright and all of that, and you know, they're backwards and all of those things. But you know, you need to have respect for the rest of your citizens, and if your country isn't going to pull itself apart. And I really see this happening from an outsider's perspective when I come down here. And I lived in the States for a while, and it wasn't like this before.
If he was just a regular Republican president with Republican policies, I would say you'd have a point. But what is so alarming is the assault on democratic norms.
Okay, so already, I don't know if you guys were paying attention. No one addresses his question. No one gives him an answer. right? So like this is what I think happened. So I think what happened is there is a very, very vocal minority. I mean, sorry, a very silent majority. Sorry, not vocal minority. And sorry if I'm triggering y'all. If you guys think this is the worst stream of the year, fair enough, right? I think it's relevant and people are asking, so I'm okay. Like, so this is what I think is going on. So Peterson made a great point. There's a bunch of idiots, and I'm not saying they are stupid or aren't stupid. I'm not commenting on that, right? There's this perception that there's all these stupid people out there who voted for Trump in 2016. And I don't even think he's saying like this has nothing to do with his belief on trans or whatever the fuck. He's like, there was a gigantic chunk of people who elected this guy. What are y'all going to do to engage with them? And then it goes back to like, oh, this is a threat to democracy and all that kind of crap, right? And I'm not saying that it isn't. I'm not saying he is fascist or isn't fascist, not my area of expertise. And I think the same thing happened this year. So I think what happened this year is the conversation got dominated by certain things. The media conversation. And there's another great... So if we're speedrunning getting canceled, let's keep going by looking at this. So here's another clip that I saw that I thought was really interesting.
He's won the national popular vote for the first time for a Republican for the first time since 2004. This is a big deal. This isn't backing into the office. This is a mandate to do what you said you were going to do. Get the economy working again for regular working class Americans, fix immigration, try to get crime under control, try to reduce the chaos in the world. This is a mandate from the American people to do that. I think I'm interpreting the results tonight as the revenge of just the regular old working class American, the anonymous American who has been crushed, insulted, condescended to. They're not garbage. They're not Nazis. They're just regular people who get up and go to work every day and are trying to make a better life for their kids, and they feel like they have been told to just shut up when they have complained about the things that are hurting them in their own lives. I also feel like this election, as we sit here and pour over this tonight, is something of an indictment of the political information complex. I mean, we've been sitting around here for the last couple of weeks, and the story that was portrayed was not true. I mean, we were told Puerto Rico was going to change the election. Liz Cheney, Nikki Haley voters, women lying to their husbands. Before that, it was Tim Walz and the camo hats. Night after night after night, we were told all these things and gimmicks were going to somehow push Harris over the line, and we were just ignoring the fundamentals. Inflation, people feeling like that they were barely able to tread water at best. That was the fundamentals of the election. And so I think that both parties should always look at the results of an election and figure out what went right and what went wrong. But I think for all of us who cover elections and talk about elections and do this on a day-to-day basis, we have to figure out how to understand, talk to, and listen to the half of the country that rose up tonight and said, we've had enough.
So I think this is also a really interesting take, right? So I think that this is where I've seen this happen. I've been the beneficiary and the victim of it. So I want y'all to understand that what you receive on the internet is not reality. Here is what gets selected for. So we have to take like kind of a big step back. So if we look at these like media companies and stuff like that, like let's say CNN, Fox News, whatever, everyone is fighting for your attention because your attention means money. That is how all of these companies make money. Your attention. What you choose to do today determines whether an author gets paid, whether Fox News makes money, whether advertisers show up on Twitter, whether TikTok makes money, whether I make money, whether Google makes money, whether Twitch makes money. Everything, all of the money in the world today is getting revolved around what you are paying attention to. And it is literally the life and death of companies and industries. So there's one observation that I've made. The internet loves a delta. What does that mean? So the internet loves a really good person that is found out to be bad. The real internet really loves a really bad person who turns out to be good. Human beings, so this is like neuroscientific, human beings get acclimatized and desensitized to the same stimulus over and over and over again. That's why you can walk into a party and it seems really loud at the very, very beginning, but within a few moments, your brain literally tones down the volume on a constant noise. But if someone yells or a glass breaks, then all of our attention turns to it. So we are biologically wired to pay attention to changes. And so how does everyone keep our attention? If we say the same thing over and over and over again, no one will watch us and my company will die. So what does the company do? Oh, this comedian made this comment. So now Puerto Ricans, now everything has changed. Trump was winning, but now Puerto Ricans are going to do this. Oh, now something has happened in Gaza. So now everything has changed. Now everything has changed. Now everything has changed. Because we as human beings don't listen to the same crap over and over and over again. We always need novelty. And what is the simplest form of novelty? Change. Right? So we see this right now going on with Mr. Beast. And I'm not commenting about, I have no idea what the guy did do, didn't do, what's right, what's wrong. I'm not passing judgment on that. Right? I saw that there was some report or something where people were like, they had a third-party law firm investigate them and they found isolated incidents. And everyone is like up in arms over this. So one thing that I'm just curious about, I'm not trying to say pro or con or whatever. Maybe I'm opening up another can of worms, but let's say that that was the truth. How do we receive that information, right? So let's say that there were isolated incidents. Scenario number one is there's isolated incidents. Scenario number two is that there was some pervasive negligence or malice or whatever. If the first thing was true, and then they do a third party, let's say they did everything right, and this is the finding, are we going to accept that? Of course not. And this is what we love, right? We love anyone who is in one direction and gets pulled in a different direction. I love also that this person called out the media for being a part of this process. We're also a part of this process because of the way that we receive information. People on the internet usually don't know what they're talking about. Like, that's like pretty common. I saw a study recently that 95% of short form content about ADHD is incorrect. 95%. We don't know what we're talking about on the internet. Everyone is sure on the internet and no one actually knows anything. Very few people actually know stuff. And usually what happens, you can look at like Reddit and you'll see this. So sometimes I lurk in a particular subreddit where people regard me as an expert in this topic. And I lurk on a particular subreddit and I participate. And it's really interesting. I've been running this internal experiment for about 4 years where sometimes I'll respond. No one knows who I am. Sometimes my response is the top voted comment. Sometimes it's the bottom voted comment. The difference is how simple and memeish it is. The more depth, the more nuance, the more information I add to the subject, the lower it gets voted. And it's not like it gets negatively voted. It gets like 2 upvotes. And if I say like 6 lines that offer some depth, but also offer a meme, it's going to be the top comment. This is what the internet selects for. It selects for ignorance. It selects for emotional reaction. It selects for change. So I think a big part of like this election and everyone being confused and upset and stuff like that is because we had a really stupid idea that we knew what we were talking about. I mean, people have been saying, well, like if you look at pollsters have been saying for months that things are incredibly close. And if you look at all these pictures of Harris's rallies and Trump's empty rallies, you're like, how is this even close? There's a huge selection bias. The whole problem with the world today, this is why things are so divisive, is because we're no longer living in the world. I am living in my world. You are living in your world. We're not living in the same world anymore. The assumptions that we come to the table with are completely different. It's like playing a game of chess where I have one board and you have another board. And then I make a move and you're like, where did you, that pawn was eliminated. I took that pawn 3 moves ago. How are you moving that pawn? We're not operating from, and this is what's happening with like these algorithms of echo chambers and online drift. You get on TikTok or YouTube Shorts or Facebook or whatever, Meta, I don't like, there's some difference. They're not all the same. But we get indoctrinated into a particular view of the world. This is what's going on in the world. And then another human being is operating off of a different worldview. And so what's happening, and now we get to the really kind of scary part, okay? So I'm not saying that this is good or bad. This is an observation that I'm making. This is going to trigger a lot of people. This is just an observation. It has nothing to do with what I do when I wake up in the morning.